So now we are not the best job that nobody knows about. Now we're the best job that an awful lot of people know about.
Welcome to the Awakened Anesthetist podcast, the first podcast to highlight the CAA experience. I'm your host, Mary Jean, and I've been a certified anesthesiologist assistant for close to 2 decades. Throughout my journey and struggles, I've searched for guidance that includes my unique perspective as a CAA. At one of my lowest points, I decided to turn my passion for storytelling and my belief that the CAA profession is uniquely able to create a life by design into a podcast. If you are a practicing CAA, current AA student, or someone who hopes to be one, I encourage you to stick around and experience the power of being in a community filled with voices who sound like yours, sharing experiences you never believed possible. I know you will find yourself here at the Awakened Anesthetist podcast. Welcome in. Hello, all my fellow CAAs, AA student, and anesthesia colleagues. This is your host once again, Mary Jean. You know I love these process episodes and bringing them to you. So let's kick off things like we do all things medical with a quick timeout. My guest today is Mark Leonard. Mark has been an AA since 2008, but for his first 10 years as an AA, he was living and working in England. And he wasn't technically an AA as we know them in the United States, but an anesthesia associate, which was a UK-based mid-level anesthesia provider based off of the American CAA model taken from Emory University. And Mark goes into way more detail about how this all went down. We start that conversation at about 19 minutes, 25 seconds, if you want to fast forward and get all of the info then, and then go back and listen to the beginning. It actually might help clarify a few things if this is a completely new idea to you, as it really was to me. But after Mark decided to move to the United States in 2018, he became an American CAA through Nova Tampa's program, and he currently lives and works and teaches in Tampa, Florida. Mark works clinically as a CAA 3 days a week. He works 13-hour shifts those 3 days and does mostly thoracic cases at his HCA hospital in Tampa. And the other 2 days a week, he works as the director of simulation for Nova Tampa's AA program. In addition to that, he teaches a full-service regional anesthesia course for all the Nova programs. You will hear Mark's passion for regional anesthesia and how that all came to be in this episode as well. So he teaches that course for Nova Tampa, Nova Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville, Denver, and the soon-to-be Nova Orlando program. And if that wasn't enough, Mark also runs regional anesthesia and vascular access courses with the Tampa-based company ultrasoundexperts.com. This truly expansive and kind of crazy different story episode is going to expand any practicing CAAs who want or need to work abroad, any AA students who want to do a rotation abroad, and any AA students or CAAs who have big dreams and want inspiration to just get out there and take that first step towards making it happen. I'm so excited for everyone to get to know Mark Leonard. He's truly an amazing human being and CAA, and I hope you enjoy this process episode. I'm just really excited that we connected because you have such a unique CAA journey that I think is really expansive and also just really interesting and going to answer, I think, a lot of questions that some CAAs have in their mind. I feel like you've lived some of these answers and can kind of give us a little bit of advice. So I would love to first jump in and start with a rapid fire round to get to know you a little bit better, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, fire away.
Okay, first one, let's start light. What's the best show or series that you've watched lately?
Oh my gosh. I'm not a huge TV watcher, which is disappointing to my wife. What did we watch recently? We watch a lot of kind of like real life drama things. I'm trying to even think. Like my wife's rewatching This Is Us. So
a little drama, a little family drama, Mark.
Yeah, so I've started watching that. So I suppose that's kind of the main thing. But if I watch TV, I'm watching football games.
Okay, respectable. Are you an extrovert or an introvert, Mark?
Okay. Well, it really depends on the situation, but I suppose I'm quite extrovert and have to be kind of in our position and
Yeah.
my position that I hold.
Yeah. What time do you go to bed and what time do you wake up?
So I like to be heading to bed for about 9:30 so I can be asleep by 10. I have palpitations if the time runs on. Last night I was watching the Bucks game, so it was after 11. So I was like, oh, this is going to be terrible. And I'm normally awake around about between 5:30 and 6 a.m. depending.
Mm-hmm. Is that to like get up and immediately go to work, or do you like to have a slow morning?
I like to get up, drink tea, and then my wife has to get up. We've got 2 children, so we have to get them ready to go to school. So that's a process trying to wake a 12-year-old up every single morning. So I like to help her in the mornings.
Uh-huh. You just gave us a little glint of the answer to my next question, which no stereotypes, but I'm wondering if you're a coffee or possibly a tea person.
I'm definitely a tea drinker. Twining's English breakfast tea or Twining's everyday tea. So I'm definitely a UK traditionalist tea drinker. Apparently there was a whole war about it, but we don't talk about it much in the UK.
What goes into your tea? Because it's not just black tea. That's traditional,
No.
right?
So we drink hot tea. I do drink iced tea as well. I'm a big fan of iced tea now with lemonade. And I will drink my tea hot with milk and sugar.
I see. Okay. Well, let's see here. One last thing from the tea and your accent. I think possibly we've all gathered that you're from the UK. So I'm just wondering, now that you live in Florida, what's the thing you miss most about living in England?
I mean, I'll say fish and chips, but I suppose my family as well, because they're still there. So, but certainly some food stuffs, although I'm not like the usual English person that moves to America and wants to make America Britain again. I've settled into the US lifestyle, but there are some food stuffs that I do miss.
Uh-huh. Now I'm interested what you think the biggest difference in American lifestyle versus UK lifestyle is.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I suppose for me, it's really that kind of outdoorsy thing. I live in Florida. Mm-hmm. So my family lifestyle is very, very outdoorsy. When I lived in the UK, I didn't have a pool. It wasn't, in the 70s over the winter. So you couldn't go out on your bicycles or play football in the street. I think it's a very, very different lifestyle for my family. It's a great environment to bring up my younger children. So, I suppose that's the main. I mean, there's many other differences, but politics is politics, religion is religion. So, all of those things it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can have those things. But I suppose lifestyle is different.
That sounds like a good change. I'm proud of the US that it wasn't some horrific, awful thing that you were about to say.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
All right. Tell us a little bit more about your upbringing as a child and your cultural background to give us a real sense of who you are.
Okay, so I was born in 1971, so I'm an old guy. I was born in Bournville in Birmingham. Birmingham is home of Peaky Blinders, so if anybody watches that series, that we're not all gangsters like that, but we do all look like the characters. Bournville is famous for Cadbury's chocolate. So I was a Cadbury's kid. Both my parents worked at Cadbury's. George Cadbury, when he started Cadbury's, they were of a Quaker faith. And they were very, very great believers in family values. So if you got married whilst you worked for Cadbury's, you were given a rental house. So my mom still lives in that original house from 54 years ago.
Wow.
Everybody had huge yards, lots of green space and parkland, open areas for people to exercise and do things. But growing up as a teenager, you want more things to do. And the Quaker religion, I'm not a Quaker by background, but the Quaker religion, no licensed premises, those family values meant stores not being open 24/7, etc. So it got pretty boring as a youth, so in my teenage years, and we would start to get into trouble. Gangs of kids would sit around in the parks, and inevitably, when you get to an age where you can get somebody to buy drink for you, we'd be drinking Budweiser and carrying I always remember a 3D superwoofer stereo around, stereotypically listening to the Beastie Boys and Run DMC and whatever other rap music at the time, thinking we were like Americans, so shotgunning Budweiser cans and generally getting into trouble. And I thought,
Mark.
well, yeah, I have a bad back. Not so bad. So I kind of thought that if that's not the life that I wanted, I'd always worked from when I was kind of 12 years old. I started working and always had a great work ethic and thought I need to get away from this. Otherwise I'm going to fall into trouble and just never, ever leave Bourneville. And no disrespect to people of my friends and family that are all still within Bourneville. But certainly from my point, I didn't want that. So I joined the military when I was signed up when I was 15, went in when I was 16, relatively short-lived career in the military, had an accident and I didn't know what to do with myself. So kind of flitted around and I worked in a casino for a little bit. I worked in catering for a little bit and none of these things kind of, just jumped around trying to find my avenue, but still trying to work because that's always, my whole kind of life was about working and providing for myself. I was the oldest of 4 siblings. My parents were very working class family. If I wanted any designer clothing or anything, I had to work for it because my mum would say, I've got 4 of you to buy school shoes for. So if you want like high-end sneakers, then there's £10 that I'd normally buy you sneakers. And if you want £50 sneakers, you've got to put 40 to them. So that gave me the desire to work, to buy nice things. Eventually, I kind of stumbled into driving a little kind of minivan around with taking patients to and from hospital appointments. So our little old ladies and men going to their hospital appointments. And I enjoyed that, but then worked my way up through that to start to become a medic and then did a lot of sporting medicine. So a lot of boxing, Thai fighting, motocross, car racing, etc. And that was fun at the time, but prohibitive in the respect that it was all evenings and all weekends and long hours. And we travelled across the UK providing medical services. It didn't really fit well with my life then. And then in the UK, in Birmingham, we had a newspaper, the Birmingham Evening Mail. And if you wanted a job on a Thursday evening, you would buy the Evening Mail and it would be full of advertisements and it would be broken down into automotive or electronic and there'd be a medical section. And I just read through it one Thursday and there was an advertisement that said, an exciting career working in the theatre. Now, not the theatre as in Broadway. In the UK, operating rooms are called the theatres. Historically, people would pay to go and watch an operation and they would sit in a theatre environment watching those and just that name stayed there. I thought, this sounds like fun and I'm not outside in the cold and wet and mud and, driving around the UK. I could be working inside there. So I took a job as what was called then an operating department practitioner. And then that led me into coming in as a mid-level. There's a little process behind that, but that was my route to getting into being an AA in the UK, which I was not an AA to start with. It was a different name, and then moving out to the States.
I hear a question and also a comment. The comment is that I can hear in your journey how you had a little bit of a meandering path to finding the ultimate career that was meant for you. And I think, there's two kind of sides of that. Like some people are still in that immediately high school, then college, then grad school, then working. And like, it's this rush, go, go, go. And then I think there's this other group that kind of meanders and finds their own way to CAA. So I wanted to hear your comments on that. And then I also wanted you to just paint a little bit of a picture on your educational background up to that point, because I'm not familiar with how that works in England.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll do the education first of all. So UK education is very different from the US education. So as I said, I was kind of enlisted to the military when I was 15 and joined when I was 16. So you could leave high school at 16. It's changed somewhat now that if you don't have a position to go to, then you stay in high school till 18 in the most part. But you would leave school very early. 16 years old is very young to go off and do something, take an apprenticeship or stay in school to do what would be known as A levels in the UK, so advanced levels. So that education's somewhat different. I always knew I was going to join the military, whatever I was going to join the military in. I wanted to join military police, and they told me that wasn't such a good place to be. So to join the infantry, which was at 15 years old, was the worst advice anybody had ever given me. But I knew I wanted to be a soldier, so that's what I did. I signed up. So I didn't go crazily doing my exams and trying to kind of, be a GPA of 4 student. I did well enough, but not fantastic. And then, of course, when I left the military, I was kind of at a loss because I didn't have any other route to go. So that background of kind of trying to find my way was different. I want to come back to that in a second, but then the route to get into the AA in the UK was somewhat different in the respect that the entry into the AA program in the UK was not like it is here with the prerequisites, etc., etc. It was on the merit of your experience, what was going on with you as a person, personally at the time, and then interview, etc. And then to go to the university to do the degree. And again, the degree was slightly different. It was called a postgraduate diploma with a master's option bolted onto that. So not everybody had to come out with a master's if you didn't want to. There was a research dissertation to do as part of your master's. So that was kind of the educational background to get into that. And that's still the way that it is now across the universities that are running the course. Some universities are now offering a full master's program as part of that. But it's still, for the most part, 27 months. And then you come out with that kind of postgrad diploma, which is a higher degree. In terms of kind of the flitting around before coming into AA, I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. I came out of the military. I was at a loss. I'd done all these other little jobs trying to just earn some money and do things, but not knowing what I wanted to be or who I was. And when I stumbled into driving my little minivan around with my elderly population, taking to their appointments, I was a young guy, in my early 20s. And then all of a sudden, you're thrust into this group of 70, 80, 90-year-olds that you maybe have nothing in common with, and you have to find a common ground. So you very quickly learn communication. We would drive around listening to 50s and 60s radio stations and regaling stories of how they worked during the wars, etc. And I honestly believe that made me a better person in terms of my communication skills and the way that I could deal with a multicultural population. The UK is very multicultural. So, on one minivan, I could have someone from the UK, someone from Ireland, a Pakistani, so a Jamaican, everybody would be bundled together. So learning those different cultures and, those language differences, etc., I think was a great benefit for me. And I don't want to be disrespectful to any of the students that come into the program, because as faculty, I interview these people, but I can absolutely see a clear demarcation from people that have had some sort of background, whether that be that they have worked before or worked while they were doing undergrad. So I can still get the younger students that come into the program that maybe have worked at servers or as servers, certainly in a catering environment is normally where we find. And we find those people have had to have great communication skills, otherwise they're not getting their tips and they're not earning their money. Or likewise, people that have worked in a customer service environment, they're very good at dealing with people and knowing how to communicate. And we all know communication is absolutely key in our position in that tiny amount of time that we get to deal with our patient. I'm a great believer that I think that a little bit of kind of background skills, dare I say my bigoted views, that I think that people should have a little bit more experience before they come into a program, even if they just volunteer for 6 months as a patient volunteer, escorting patients to and from departments, etc., and helping out, will give them a great understanding of patients' communications, the way that the healthcare system works.
Yes. I noticed that too, that it's almost intangible. You can't quite put your finger on why a first year student just feels so much more confident. Like it portrays as confidence when you have that interpersonal communication skill. And that's interesting because I too think that it is that exposure. I mean, it doesn't have to be in healthcare, but that exposure to talking to different types of people, being in uncomfortable situations and having to, still listen and speak and respond and like hold yourself in a way that like, just I think is a skill. It's something that needs to be practiced. So that's interesting that you feel like that's what that time gave you. And also I think interesting if you're a prospective AA listening right now and wondering what's something I can do to really beef up my application is maybe getting a job like that lets you use your interpersonal skills and then say, I intentionally did this because I think it's important as an AA to have really high quality interpersonal communication. I think that would be like, oh, wow, you've really thought about this,
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a great advocate of people. I think what we're tending to see is two different streams of people coming into the profession, and the people that say, well, my shadowing form says I need to do 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to do 8 hours.
Yeah.
If you want to base your whole life choice on 8 hours of studying in an OR, depending on where you go, depending on who you are with, you might be sat in the corner and you may just be there just to get that form signed for your 8 hours. Or we get our other people that are regularly shadowing and, they'll be like, oh, I've done 100 hours now. Do you think that's enough?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like, okay, well, I think that's a pretty good amount of hours to kind of base your decision on. So yeah, I'm a great believer that people need to, I'm just going to jump into something else that my comment always used to be, this is the best job nobody knows about. So that's how it was, when you would interview people, you would say, how did you hear about this? And it would really be, oh, I was at a party, I'd offended a friend's girlfriend.
Uh-huh.
I knew I was doing this in undergrad and they did this and they told me about it. And then I looked into it, I did my research and blah, blah. Now, of course, we have some amazing access to our program. The work that you're doing with the podcast is fantastic. The work that people like Chabeli and Taylor and Anesthesia do out there on social media. We were lazy. My generation was lazy because did we promote our role? No, we didn't promote our role. Now, people are coming forwards and saying, well, there's not much out there. Let's do this. What that has done, though, is opened up our role. So now we are not the most, the best job that nobody knows about. Now we're the best job that an awful lot of people know about.
Mm-hmm.
So that market to get into the AA program is very, very competitive. So as prospective students that may be listening to this, people that want to get into the program, you've got to make yourself marketable. You've got to come to interview, and those communication skills are going to really kind of stand out in interview, and we can read from your references as a recommendation, etc., that you've been doing things. We can read that out of you in interview. And I like to see that people have done things. I like to see that people have worked. I worked from 12 years old. I was self-sufficient for a long time. So I like to see people that have had the battle and kind of been working and have that mindset, as opposed to the other mentality that maybe watched some videos that have resurfaced recently about how much money that we earn and how fast you can pay off your student loans, and then think, hell, I'm going to do that because it's a financial decision.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you for speaking directly to that prospective AA, because that it's the prospective AA audience is quickly outnumbering the AA audience, the people who are looking for that information. So thanks for offering your wisdom there. I wanted to transition us into really drilling down to this idea of CAAs, which I don't want people to get hung up on the abbreviations or the acronyms, although it is very confusing, because I just want to call out that in England, there is oftentimes a parallel anesthesia provider to what is in the United States, but it is called something different. So Mark and I are going to be speaking kind of like parallel language. I'm going to create a little bit of a key in the show notes. So if you're listening to us right now and you're a little confused of what I'm talking about or Mark's talking about, and if we're using an acronym you're not familiar with, go to the show notes. But I do want Mark to describe how there are AAs or an AA equivalent working in England right now. And that is how Mark came to the United States, a hop, skip, and a jump. So take us back to England trying to find mid-level providers and how they landed on AAs.
Okay. So it was always traditionally a physician-delivered service in the United Kingdom, and they would be anaesthetists. So junior doctors, medical school was 5 years. in the UK. So they would do 5 years at medical school, then come out of medical school and then go through their training. Now here, obviously, we call it residency. In the UK, they would be trainees. And the trainees went from CT, core trainees, to ST, which was specialist trainees. So core trainees would do the different medical specialities and move around, hop, skip and jump around those different specialities. And then they would choose anesthesia as their profession and then be ST trainees. So that was a 7-year process. That was without them doing any sort of fellowship. So then if they wanted to do a year's fellowship of intensive care or regional anesthesia, that would add on to that. So it was kind of a minimum of around 12 years from starting medical school to be a physician, and then they would become a consultant anaesthetist. So they don't call themselves anesthesiologists in the UK. Back in the late 90s, they looked and saw that the amount of numbers of people entering anesthesia were dwindling. And we had an aging population. We're victims of our own success by medicating and making people live longer because of medication, healthcare, etc. So in that respect, more people buy into the healthcare service. So there's an increased demand for that. Anesthesia in the UK was also a very female populated speciality. So a lot more females were entering anesthesia. Now, females have one thing over a male if you choose to have a child or not. And in the UK, you can take 12 months off if you have a baby. Very different to the US. And 9 months of that 12 months would be paid.
Yay!
So, exactly. Look. So what would happen then is, obviously, whilst you were on maternity leave, there would be a shortage of providers. So they needed a kind of a continuity. And while you were training, you would move around from hospital to hospital. So the continuity was going to come in the way of introducing a mid-level service. So in the late 90s, they started to look at that, and they looked around Europe where there were a few different countries kind of experiencing and utilizing advanced practitioners to work alongside anesthesia. But predominantly, they came back to the US. In the UK, we have Royal Colleges. Okay? So we have the Royal College of Anaesthetists, or anaesthetists, as we say, because we put an extra A in there. And we have the Royal College of Nurses. And they were working together to look at providing an anesthesia service. Now, of course, the Royal College of Nurses said, we need CRNAs. So we need to do it down the nursing route. And the anesthesiologists, or the anaesthetists in the UK, were like, well, in the US, they've parted ways. There's two specialities, there's a little bit of fraction between them. So what can we find? And they stumbled upon the AA program, and ultimately through Emory University, they created what were anesthesia practitioners in the early 2000s. So that was when the program started. What they did was they took 2 Swiss anesthesia providers, brought them to the UK, dropped them into an area in the UK that was very different to their mountainside residents that they lived in Switzerland, and saw how that program would work. And then those 2 people were the first 2 people, alongside a handful of others, that then entered the program. In the UK then, in the early 2000s, the government said, well, we're going to help support this kind of new profession that's going to help our anesthesia services. We're going to pay for it. So if you are a hospital and you want anesthesia practitioners, as we were at the time, we will give you the money to pay them a salary, to pay their university fees, and to kind of give them a job afterwards. So a lot of hospitals were like, well, this is cost neutral to us. We may as well do it and see the benefit of that. So they did that for 5 years when the government was funding the money. And then after 5 years, the government said, okay, you're on your own and you can pay for it now. And we have a nationalized health service that has to kind of penny pinch every nickel and dime or penny and pound in the UK. And they said, well, we don't want to spend all this money on training these people now. So training numbers dropped from what wasn't a lot of training numbers, so certainly much smaller than some of the class sizes in the US, down to maybe 2 people a year being trained. So it kind of, the market dropped out of it for a short time. Now there's been a resurgence, and again, the government are refunding this. Part of that on the back of PAs also coming to the UK and then wanting to run that physician extender program between how they are now in the UK being AA, sorry, and then PA. So my name changed 3 times when I was in the UK. I was an anesthesia practitioner, an AP. And then we realized that different specialities were calling themselves anesthesia practitioners. So assistants like medical anesthesia techs in the UK were calling themselves APs. So we changed the title because at that point then, in the mid-2000s, we were bringing physician assistants over. So we changed our title to physician assistant anesthesia, summed up what we were doing. The physician assistants arrived in the UK, and the physician assistants said, hell, we aren't assistants, we're associates. We don't want that assistant moniker. So they immediately rebranded themselves as physician associates in the UK, and then us as physician assistants anesthesia rechanged our names to anesthesia associates. So now we have PAs, physician associate, AA, anesthesia associate. And then in the US, the PAs are just kind of going through that name change for physician associate in the US.
You've hit on such a pain point here in the United States, which is our name. For a very long time, our name was anesthesiologist assistant. And then in my career, and I don't know the year to this, maybe I'll find that out, but in the show notes, we changed to certified anesthesiologist assistant with the hope that we would all start introducing ourselves, maybe as our full name, but at the very least as a CAA, because there's been so much disdain for the fact that we have assistant in our name. I'm wondering, since you went through 3 derivations of a name, how much weight do you think it actually holds that our name is CAA, anesthesiologist assistant, and whether we should really be pushing for a name change, and if that's even possible, if the PAs just did it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the assistant title is definitely not representative of our role. Obviously, it was a title that was bestowed on us for, I believe, Medicare and Medicaid. I don't know the true background of how our title was given, but we became, anesthesiologist assistants. The assistant moniker can easily be used against us as a wood-peeling stick. And people that don't know us, and especially when we're going into new states to try and gain licensure and go through legislation in new states, if you go to somebody that sits in a house or sits on a board of something and you say, oh, they are anesthesiologist assistants, they're like, okay, well, we understand an assistant. You look in the dictionary and you know what the title of an assistant is. I think it's very kind of below what our actual role is. And not everybody understands that until we explain it. And we don't get a chance or a time to explain that to our patients. We barely get 5 minutes to speak to them to elicit their full medical history out of them without actually saying, well, this is what I do, etc. And certainly some of our other anesthesia professions may use that assistant title against us. And, we've certainly seen, maybe if we watch the Washington videos from, our push to gain a licensure in Washington at the moment, a lot of derogatory things are said about, kind of using that. So when physician assistants came to the UK, they were like, well, we're not assistants, we're physician extenders. That's an associate of the physician title. So they changed their name. And then in the US, they've just gone through that name change. Do I think we should? Absolutely. I don't think that the assistant is a representative at all of our role or what we do. Do I think we can afford it? Possibly not at the moment. It's another thing that as AAs, we maybe once we've qualified and we just kind of go about our daily routine of working, we don't invest in our organizations, our associations to put money into that account to help us fight for these things. From what I believe, it was maybe well over $1 million for the physician assistants to change their title to associate. We just don't have that money. And is it a priority to change our title, or is it a priority to push to open more states in the US and more acceptance of us? So if we could kind of flick a switch and change our title, I would all be for one. And, whatever we decided our title would be, as people that pay into our state membership should have a vote on what we think would be, add strength and credibility. But certainly that system can be used against us.
Yeah. I know so many people agree with you on all accounts there. I think it'll be really interesting to watch the PAs in the United States transition from physician assistants to physician associates and see how that goes as a roadmap for maybe something that we can do in the future. So thanks for bringing that up. I didn't know that PAs were transitioning their brand, their name. So I'll be now Googling all of that stuff. Okay, so you were working as an anesthesia associate, which was really a renaming, kind of a revamping of CAAs taken from Emory's US program. And you were working as such starting in 2008. And then I know that you came to Florida. You were recruited to come to Florida to do something very specific within the Nova Tampa campus. And I just was wanting to hear that story firsthand from you of how you were brought to the United States and why.
Yeah, it's a bit of a crazy story.
Great.
So in around about 2011, we had a student from NSU Fort Lauderdale that reached out to my association, which was the Association of Physicians Assistants Anesthesia, the APAA in the UK, and said, "Hey, I'm an SAA in the US in Fort Lauderdale. I've heard that your program is very similar to mine. I'd love to be able to come over and do an elective placement in the UK. Can it happen?" So at one of our association meetings, we said, "Oh, this guy's emailed us. He wants to come over. What do we think?" So one of my colleagues from the UK sat on our association at the time, and she said, "I think we could accommodate them. We've got a big hospital. We were a 44 OR hospital. We had 100 anesthesiologists and almost 100 trainees, residents there. So we can accommodate a couple of Americans to come over, and maybe they'll bring some candy, and, we can learn some stuff, and that will be it." So this was around 2011, 2012. So I think in 2012, two SAAs from Fort Lauderdale arrived in the UK, and we met them in the atrium of our hospital. And, in the UK, it's very different. You can't wear your theatre blues or your OR. We call the theatre. The OR is the theatre in the UK. Can't wear your theatre blues outside of the OR. So these two people are there in their blues, and, we get their white coats on and their stethoscopes around their neck, stood in the middle of a busy atrium with everybody looking at them like, "Who are these people?" with their fancy personal hats on. And, again, something that we don't do in the UK. We're very British. We can't wear our own hats, etc. So that started kind of the relationship. Now, if we just jump back a few years, when I graduated, or when I qualified, my clinical service lead for my hospital said, "Okay, well, great that you've qualified. We're going to love having you guys around, but we don't have any work for you, because you can only do ASA 1 and 2 patients," which were the guidelines from the Royal College of Anaesthetists at the time. And the hospitals kind of were 2 separate site hospitals, a level 1 trauma centre, which was at that time also the main military hospital, dealing with every single soldier that had been injured in Afghanistan from the UK and around the world. Vascular surgery, big specialities, no real ASA 1 and 2 patients. And then the other ORs in the other hospital were stacked. So they were on top of each other. So then an anesthesiologist was like, "I'm not running up and down stairs trying to supervise a urology and then running down 4 flights of stairs, etc." It just wasn't feasibly working. The only ORs that were next to each other that worked were for hand surgery, and predominantly the injuries there were from young, fit, healthy patients. So work-related injuries, power tools, crush injuries, etc., etc. So they said, well, the patient market fits the bill. The ORs are side by side, so you can work in the block room. And me and my colleague, who were the first 2 people that had qualified there, were like, well, we learned some regional anesthesia as part of our training, but we never really did a lot. So in about 2009, the military then come to us and said, "We need you to help with our soldiers. They're all coming back, blown to pieces, multiple limb injuries, very poor pain control for them, other than giving them, high dose opioids, etc. But some of these soldiers are coming back from American hospitals out in Afghanistan with these nerve catheters and we don't really know much about them. So here's an ultrasound. Can you learn how to use it? So the military provided us with our very first sonocyte, S-nerve. And nobody really knew how to use it. So myself and my colleague went away to London on a residential course to learn how to use it, and then basically come back and honed our skills. And then we moved into a new hospital not long after that, where we combined both of those hospitals into one super hospital, and we created a block room. And the block room was amazing. We had the buy-in from surgeons, the buy-in from residents. The trainees loved to come through there. And on a day-to-day basis, that block room was overseen by an anesthesiologist, a consultant anaesthetist, but pretty much most of the anesthesia was delivered by AAs. So we were the people in there doing the nerve blocks under the supervision of an anesthesiologist and with trainee doctors alongside us. So we were doing thousands of nerve blocks per year. Very different healthcare system in the UK with the National Health Service. So in the US, our patients are like, I'm paying my insurance. I want my GA. You can give me a block for my pain relief. I want a Percocet to take home. I want this. I want that. In the UK, we have to fight every nickel and dime. So we're looking at our pennies and our pounds. So we say, okay, well, you're not going to sleep. You're going to have a brachial plexus block, and then you're going to lie awake on the table. We'll put the radio on for you, and then afterwards we'll give you a cup of tea and some biscuits, cookies, and we'll send you home with a bag of painkillers for 3 days. And that's the way that it worked. And to start with, of course, patients were like, I'm not going to wait for my surgery. This is barbaric. And so I got funding for iPads and noise-cancelling headphones. So then we'd say, okay, now you can watch a movie. And then we developed the biggest block service in, I might say, the world, certainly, definitely in the UK, certainly in Europe, maybe in the world, where we were pushing thousands of patients per year through our block room for wide awake regional anesthesia, just done under ultrasound nerve block.
Wow.
So then we fast forward back to 2012 when the Americans arrived. They were like, wow, the students. Yeah. So the students were like, wow, we'd like to jump on board of this. And we want to learn some ultrasound and some regional anesthesia. So they came to the UK for 2 months. They came to Birmingham, England, and then they went to Carmarthenshire in Wales, which is a little bit, remember, the UK is made up by England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. So those two hospitals would host them. So 2 students would come to Birmingham, then they'd move over to Wales. And they predominantly were doing a lot of regional anesthesia. So when they came back to the US, they had amazing skills. They'd been doing lots of blocks, lots of vascular access with ultrasound. So in the classes at the time, there was Nova Tampa, Nova Fort Lauderdale. So probably, between 70 and 80 students per year. 6 students came to the UK. So less than 10% of those students had great ultrasound skills. And that was obviously representative on the NCCAA board exam, where we got the breakdown of the specialities and who had done what. And regional anesthesia was an area where we were, kind of less than, either on average or less than average. So Dr. Rob Wagner, for anybody who knows him, Dr. Robert Wagner, who's the chair of the Department of Anesthesia for NSU, reached out and said, hey, rather than 6 students a year coming, why don't you come over here and teach 70 to 80 students a year, and then they will be all good at regional anesthesia. And my wife said no. And then the next year, Dr. Wagner asked again, and my wife said no again. And it went on and on and on until in the end, in 2017, Dr. Wagner said, I want to speak to your wife. And anyone who's ever met Dr. Wagner will understand he could sell ice to Eskimos. So he's a very, very key, we call him the godfather of anesthesia down in Florida. He has a license number 1 in Florida, so he's been around for a long time. So he spoke to my wife. I was not there. I never know what was said, but amazingly, I got home after their conversation and she said, hey, we're going to visit America. And I'm like, what do you mean? She said, we're going to Tampa in December 2017. I'm like, I have no vacation time. We're selling our house. What is going on? So this was kind of in the June. So from June 2017 up until December 2017, we researched everything about the States. We started talking to the NCCAA about qualifications, getting transcripts from universities backwards and forwards. And then in March the 3rd, 2018, my wife, my two children who were 4 and I don't even remember their ages. They were very young at the time. And 8 suitcases left the UK with probably 2 feet of snow in the UK. We barely managed to drive our rear-wheel drive minivan down to London to get to the airport. And 2 adults, 2 kids, and 8 suitcases got off the plane in Orlando. The heat hit us. We went to our Airbnb. My kids jumped in the pool in March in the US, and that was it. We never looked back.
Wow. Oh my. Oh gosh. You know what really strikes me about that story, which is not surprising to me now, but the people who catalyzed that entire chain reaction were the 2 brave Nova students who thought, I want to do something that's never been done before and I'm going to go do it. Like, that's who started that whole thing. Do you agree?
Yeah, it was like the domino effect of just
Yeah.
literally writing an email. This individual just sent them email, and then there's a whole process behind that. So the other schools that are listening and students thinking, hey, I want to go to the UK. Oh, believe me, it was not easy to set that up. Now, when the first 2 people arrived, we didn't know what to do with them. We didn't realize that they had kind of training competencies, logbook achievements that they needed to do. All of the specialities that they had to cover. Now, we had 44 ORs in our hospital. We had everything except pediatrics and obstetrics was done at a sister hospital just across the street from ours, so they couldn't get access to that. We didn't know what to do with them. Insurances, who was giving them their insurance? Was it us? In which case, were we going to let them do anything? Was it the university? What happened? So we had to work tirelessly with NSU's legal division, etc., to get everything ironed out. So the first 2 that came, it was very much a leap of faith of not knowing what they needed and what we wanted from them. But it worked well. And then that has been a tradition that's carried on until the current day. We actually have students that are in the UK at the moment who are practicing in the UK. And we up those figures from 6 to slightly more, mainly because now obviously Nova has our 4 schools. So we have a lot more than those 80 students there. So to add fairness to all of those schools, we sent them from August when they went to see the clinicals in our cycle through till February. Now we send our Denver programs on a different cycle. So those students from Denver go out at a slightly different time. So it's a tradition that's carried on for some time.
Yeah. Wow. That is a crazy story. And I'm so inspired by all of that, by every person who made an extra effort or like bet on themselves or like leaned into fear. Like that's just really inspiring.
Absolutely.
Can you describe a little bit, because you got off the plane in Tampa and Orlando, sorry.
Yeah.
And you were going to work at Nova Tampa, but now you work for all the schools. Can you explain kind of what your day-to-day looks like or what you're actually teaching for Nova?
Yeah. So myself and the person who was the leading commander in Wales were both invited over. So we both had that unique skill set of ultrasound, and kind of mine was more on the regional anesthesia side. The other faculty member that came over, his was more on the vascular access side. They run an amazing PIC service back in Wales, PIC line, midlines, vascular access service there. So when we were invited over, that individual went to Fort Lauderdale. I was coming into Tampa. And that's how it stayed. That individual's since gone back to the UK because of family reasons. So I'm the only person. I'm the last man standing, as it were. And so we came in the March, and I actually came on a long-term visitor's visa because I was living with my mother-in-law, who I love very dearly. But when you have you and your wife and 2 kids living with your mother-in-law in a small 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, it becomes all of a sudden very different. So we decided we'd come out in the March. And then we knew about the job at Nova, but it wasn't formally given. So we still had a process to go through. That took a little bit of time then for myself to be interviewed, to go through that onboarding process. And then visas, which is was the biggest issue we had. So I came here in March the 3rd. I didn't actually start working for Nova until August of the
Wow.
same year. So, kind of 5 months later, I started working. That's a huge expense. Anybody that lives in Florida will know when you're paying $3,000 a month in rental and you've got 2 kids, everything else that goes with it, and you're not working for 5-6 months, you soon burn through any savings that you've had. So I started at Nova Tampa, which at the time then was in a small facility outside of the beautiful new building that we've got now, and predominantly teaching. Initially, we set up a whole essentials of ultrasound course. So ultrasound regional anesthesia, ultrasound vascular access, etc. But teaching other things as well. So I was teaching in labs, so doing lab simulation. I'm doing SLS, a student lecture series where we teach our students to present appropriately and do research. That was very good. At the time then, I was traveling in the semesters that we were doing the ultrasound courses between Tampa and Fort Lauderdale and doing those schools. And then Jacksonville opened. So then that was another triangulating up to Jacksonville, and then Denver opened. So then flying up to Denver then. And basically kind of doing the ultrasound. So in this semester that we're in now, we start doing a little bit of ultrasound education. This is my Denver semester, so I'll start teaching the Denver program, doing all of their academic and didactic teaching for regional anesthesia and ultrasound. Then later on in this semester, I'll go up to Denver so we can do one-on-one teaching. So I'll go up there for a long weekend period so everybody gets a chance to kind of go through all of our hands-on teaching. Next semester, our summer semester, I'll then flick between Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, and Jacksonville. And then when Orlando comes on board, when NSU Orlando opens, then, that'll be another one added in for 2025 that I'll end up going there. I then took on our lab director who was with Nova, left Nova. So I was offered the lab director's position. So now I'm lab director for Nova Tampa. So that involves obviously setting up the labs, writing the scenarios, lab final situations, everything that goes with the day-to-day running of all of the labs. And this current semester, so I'm doing Denver teaching for ultrasound, lab director, and I'm back to teaching SLS again, or proctoring the SLS scenario. So it's wide and varied. So yeah, and that's on 2 days a week. So I work on a Tuesday and a Friday at Nova doing those things, as well as everything else that I do to promote our profession or look after students, take shadowers, etc. So
yeah, and you seem so energized about it. Like what you just listed feels like so much for me, because I'm not in that. I mean, that regional world just doesn't feel tangible to me. But I can tell how lit up you are about it. And I wanted to speak a little bit about that, like how there are some CAs like myself who would say, I'm not skilled at regional anesthesia. I went to school 15 years ago. We had a little bit here and there. And I think you kind of even spoke to that's kind of where we used to be. And you're part of this movement that's moving us more towards proficiency at least basic blocks. And Nova is really a model for that, it sounds like, in terms of education. And I wanted to pick your brain as a CAA to another CAA, like, what do I need to do to know more or do more, or like, is it too late for me? Like, what would you say about older CAAs and regional anesthesia?
Well, I mean, I completely fit into that bracket, and I didn't come into this profession until I was older as well. And I just think, so there's a few different answers to that. First of all, I think that the more of us that do regional anesthesia, the more patients are going to benefit. We are in this job ultimately to service our patients. When I first came to America, I was amazed at the lack of delivery of regional anesthesia, because, in the UK, I used to come to the American Society of Regional Anesthesia meeting every year. And I'd be in awe of kind of, America, it's the panacea of doing regional anesthesia. And when I came out here and started to speak to people, what I realized was at the American Society of Regional Anesthesia meeting, it was the same couple of thousand people that were there every year, mostly anesthesiologists and residents, etc. The same faces and the same people. And when you look into literature and research, and it's the same names on publications, etc. So it was kind of an exclusive club. That's how I like to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a chic thing, the anaesthetist strolls in with his ultrasound and his needle and he takes the pain away in one. The other thing that was startling to me was the opioid crisis in the US, which I did a lot of research about when I first came here. And, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people dying each year, mainly because of, overdosing on prescription medication or not being able to get prescription medication and then going and drug finding elsewhere. So, you fracture your ankle, they give you Percocet, the next thing you're a heroin addict. Like, how does that even happen,
Yes.
So by taking that pain away and working on that was a great thing. Now, you asked about how do we learn to do it. Well, I didn't have those skills. When I came out of school, I had no idea. And as I said previously, I had to go away and learn it. And it's a very steep learning curve. When I first learned regional anesthesia, I learned it with nerve stimulator. So I was doing brachial plexus blocks, 1 milliamp, and then get my system come down to 0.3, and the patient's arms jumping around and they're squealing, and you're trying to give them more Versed, a bit of propofol. And it was just barbaric in my eyes. So then moving and developing that service made things better. I'm not the only CAA in the US that's kind of promoting it, but there's not that many drivers from our point of view. Now, we should all, my belief is we should all have a basic understanding. I'm not saying that everybody should do it because not everybody wants to, but we should have a basic understanding of probably around 8 nerve blocks. Those nerve blocks would be able to block, you could do the upper limb, you can do the lower limb, and we can do the trunk. So with those 8 limited blocks. Now, in order for us to be able to become competent at them, we have to practice them. So we have to maybe say, right, do you know what? I do a lot of abdominal surgery in my hospital, or a lot of robot surgery. The tap block would be good for those patients. Let me learn a tap block, and then let me do a tap block for every one of my patients. And when you get proficient in that block, then you can say, okay, that's good. Now I've heard of a rectus block, which may be better than a tap block for midline incisions. Why don't I learn that? Then you say, okay, what about an erector spinae plane block? That may be even better for that, and it's got to help with my breast pain. And you kind of move forward. So my first block I learned was the axillary brachial plexus block, which I think is a complicated block because there's a lot of nerves, a lot of vasculature inside there. Then I learned interscalene because those were the 2 specialities. Now, depending on where you work, probably a lot of people, if they're doing orthopedics, are doing total knee arthroplasties. And we know the adductor canal block is a great block for post-operative pain management in those patients. And certainly in my hospital, they get a spinal and an adductor canal block and 0 opioids. So we're helping do our part to reduce the opioid crisis and giving them good pain relief, early mobilization, allowing physio to be able to work with them. So now we're part of a bigger multidisciplinary team in looking at those specialities. So you pick the block that is best going to service your patient population and focus on that. Now, education is the key thing. Back in 2012, when the first American student AAs come over, at the same time, I had an idea of developing a teaching program to teach people regional anesthesia because it was predominantly in textbook form. Now, that involved basically using DVDs, okay, or CD-ROMs. You would go to a conference and you'd see something and they'd give you the CD and you'd go home and you'd put it in your computer. Yep. For the younger ones out there, that's like, a little shiny disc. If it was scratched, it wouldn't work. And that's how we shared our learning resources. At the same time, Apple released the first iPad. And I was fortunate enough that my wife liked me enough to buy me a Generation 1 iPad. And I thought, wow, this would be amazing. How do we get that CD-ROM onto this iPad, which is, of course, via an app? So I thought this would be a cool thing. So I went to a few companies and said, I've got this idea to produce an app. And they said, well, come back to us if you've got anything, kind of storyboarded or what you think about it. So we were a big hospital and we had a whole videography department in our hospital. So I went to our videographer and said, fancy developing an app? And he said, I've never done it. I wouldn't know where to start. But yeah, I really want in on this. It's the future. And we created a company called Block Guru. And we created an app, which is still out there being sold nowadays. And then from the app, we created a range of posters because not everybody had IT at the time or had an iPod or an iPhone. And certainly in third world countries, etc., they didn't have access to IT or Wi-Fi necessarily. So we created printed, laminated posters that we could send around the world. Then we developed courses from that. And then, Block Guru, it's not as active as it was because we're kind of split up around the world. But, we run those teaching programs. And then when I came to the States, I got in with an anesthesiologist over here and became part of a company called Ultrasound Experts based in Tampa, where we run courses, which now we run out of our Nova, our Nova University, because all of our facilities are there. And it's just about education. There's the American Society of Regional Anesthesia, the New York School of Regional Anesthesia, NYSORA, all kind of names that if you're interested, you would know those websites. And of course, Google. And you Google adductor canal block, and you're going to have however many tens of thousands of videos or literature reviews or whatever. So it makes it less prohibitive for us to be able to do that nowadays, to be able to learn those skills. The prohibitive nature comes in then getting our anesthesiologists to support us in clinically practicing those skills. So we then need to go to them and say, hey, I've learned all about it. I understand my anatomy, my benefits, my contraindications. I understand local. I understand about LAST and the treatment of emergencies. Get them to scan and say, okay, well, there's my sartorius muscle, there's a ductor longus, there's a ductor magnus. And so as long as we know our terminology and what we're looking at, eventually someone's going to say, okay, the next step is to put the needle in. I'm going to support you doing that. And you're going to do 1, n equals 1, equals 2, equals 3. And it escalates into that learning curve where we're doing that now. Another part of restriction on our behalf is the nomenclature and the interpretation of how our role in regional anesthesia is written into our guidelines within a state. And on a lot of respects, it says that the literature or the language will be assist with or assist in performing regional anesthesia. So assist with performing regional anesthesia would get used against us, because to assist with performing it, then that will be you'll get the drugs or you'll get the needle, not actually do it. But my interpretation is I'm assisting my anesthesiologist by performing that. So, as AAs, we're always supervised by our anesthesiologists, and we will always be supervised in that respect in my hospital when we're performing our regional anesthesia. But it adds some limitations onto the way that we can do that. And we shouldn't be exclusively prohibited from providing those skills, because there is only one person that is at disbenefit of us not being able to provide those skills, and that's our patient. And when we fight between our specialities of our nurse anesthesia colleagues and our AAs and our anesthesiologists, maybe we've lost a little bit of insight into the fact that the patient's going to benefit. The more of us that do regional anesthesia competently, the more patients that are going to be offered that service, and the more we can help with opioid crisis, pain control, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very passionate about regional anesthesia, as you can tell.
I love it. I'm soaking it all in. There's a few different things that stood out to me. One of them is I just want to say thank you for breaking down the practicalities of how someone who's not done regional in a while but wants to better the type of anesthesia they can deliver and better serve their patients, participate in a reduction in the opioid crisis, how they can actually boots on the ground make that happen. And it sounds like you're working at a hospital, you're doing some sort of surgery, you've identified the patient would benefit from regional. You're going to educate yourself in the ways that you've just laid out, using the resources that are available to CAAs and to everyone on Google. And then you're going to take your education to the anesthesiologist or to management and say, this is what I think would be best for our patients. I'd like to be involved in this new implementation. Here's the path I see forward. How can we work together to make this happen? And be persistent with it and be dedicated and, want to do it. I just think people need to want to do it. And as you said, also maybe you don't want to do it and know that okay, I'm going to go to a place where maybe that expectation isn't there for me. And maybe patients are getting regional, but it's 100% done by the docs, and I'm okay with that.
So sometimes it's just changing that mindset, just changing the kind of, just because we've always done something this way, we all know in medicine that is probably not the way to deal with medicine. Oh, this is the way I do it. We've all had mentors. We all know people that are like that. I am a huge sponge. And if I get a student come to me and say, hey, I've just rotated from this hospital and we did this at this hospital, and it worked really well, I'll say, let's try it. What have I got to lose? Let's try it. Classic example yesterday. Last week, I had a student send me an email with their logbook for the week and said, hey, I did a lung case and we used a product called an easy blocker. I don't know if you've heard about it. I don't know if you've seen it, but my main job plan clinically is thoracics. All double lumen tubes. And, if we can't get the double lumen in, we have problems. We just suffer with those. We have some uni blockers, which don't work to a great extent. But so I researched, found the blocker, the easy blocker that they were talking about, that they emailed me. And yesterday we trialed that system in the thoracic surface yesterday, and they work fantastically well. So I could have been like another bullshit grumpy person and said, oh, I'm not letting a student tell me anything. They don't know anything. Instead, as a team, we bought that product in and now said, do you know what? This could absolutely replace double lumens and the problems that they create, the consequences of that. Precedex, we don't have dexmedetomidine in the UK. It wasn't when I left the UK. I had real no kind of inkling to use it. Again, a student said to me, hey, we use Precedex in our lung group where I was in my last rotation. I said, okay, let's try and use that now. I can literally do opioid-free thoracic surgery now by using multimodal analgesia and using Exparel intercostal nerve blocks. How great is that we've changed a service? Historically, this is how it was done. And now we're developing these new skills and pathways and services and helping kind of move anesthesia into a new form and not relying on those opioids that we always did historically. And I was guilty of that. Everybody in the UK would get 100 of fentanyl and 10 of morphine for the most part. I can't remember the last time I gave anybody any morphine. And if I use more than 100 of fentanyl, then something's not working somewhere.
I just hear, I hear something that I believe is true as well, which is a flexible anesthesia provider is the best anesthesia provider. And I also wanted to just question you, what is your relationship with curiosity? That word kept coming to mind, that you just seem to have a curious nature that kind of pushes you forward. It's something that maybe not everyone has. I don't know if you've ever thought about that word before in your life.
No, but now you say it, if you spoke to my wife, I'm sure she would say, I'm very curious in the respect that, I have my hobbies kind of flip backwards and forwards. My interest in things is always kind of changing. I mean, I'm sat in this room now. Right next to me is a 3D printer that my son had for his birthday. And between us now, we're like, oh my gosh, we're 3D printing everything that we possibly can. And it's like kind of a new thing that we're getting into. And that's the same in medicine for me. I was constantly looking at those things. Some of it was dictated by, in all fairness, that I could travel the world, going to conferences. So if I was interested in regional, and I'd say, okay, well, I'm going to Vegas or I'm going here, there, all across Europe to go to the European meetings, was a great kind of learning, kind of mini vacay, as it were, to go and learn and pick things up, reading the journals, looking at what the latest literature was. So I am very curious to see kind of where we can go, what's moving forwards, how we can develop these skills. Like you alluded that Nova's got this great kind of setup for regional anesthesia, which we absolutely have. We have block rooms. We have every single site has their own ultrasounds that the students can use. We have needling phantoms from some great companies, a ton of resources that our students can use. And I know not all schools have that. But eventually, maybe they can, and maybe we can work as an association to develop some type of online learning system. I think that's a great thing that we should be looking at, is promoting as a national association through our Quad A and saying, okay, well, you may know that I work courses. pretty much every quad A. I try and run a regional course there. So whether it's vascular access, because you may say, I've got no interest in doing regional anesthesia, but I really don't want to learn it, or actually my hospital doesn't want me to do it, but I would love to learn how to use ultrasound correctly in order to be able to do my A lines more proficiently, or central lines, or just difficult IVs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another course that we teach. And I don't expect everybody to do regional, but I absolutely expect that we should all now have a great understanding of how to use an ultrasound.
Mm.
And that's going to keep us within that market. It's going to make us marketable as AAs, and other professions are not going to overtake us because they've got those skills. We should be able to offer those skills. And I know in the US it's very different. You know, I'm saying, well, maybe the Quad A should develop these courses and we should have courses that people come into. What normally happens is me as an individual will create a company, and then I want to make money out of it. I don't want to make money out of it, and I don't want the stress of doing that as an extra job.
Yeah.
But we definitely need some way of kind of promoting that.
Yes, I think the capitalistic nature that you're maybe talking about that wasn't there in the UK, where that was funded and you were creating these things, you had almost more of a creative freedom possibly to feel like I can do this because it's needed and it like fuels me, as opposed to this thing in the United States has to be a business that I'm going to sell. Oh, Mark, we could talk a lot about that, the dichotomy there. I think I want to answer a question that likely our listeners are asking themselves right now, which is, I'm a practicing CAA. Can I work as an AA in the UK or in England? And similarly, I'm a current AA student. Can I do an away rotation in England?
Okay, so the short answer to the first question, you are a practicing AA. Can you practice in England? Yes. So to my knowledge, there's no American AAs that have crossed the pond to go work in the UK. But there is one Canadian AA now. Canada also has AAs. Between the provinces, the role is somewhat different, and I don't want to offend any Canadian AAs there, but certainly there's more autonomy in different provinces, and that's the knowledge that I've had in my limited research to that. I'm happy to be corrected if people want to reach out and tell me a bit more about the Canadian AA system. But the Canadian AA was married to somebody in the military. They were being posted to the UK. And basically went to the Royal College of Anesthetists. Remember, that's our body that runs our education, and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. They were put in touch with a university that said, well, if you can get a hospital that'll sponsor you, then you can come over and we'll do an abridged version of our course for you. And from my knowledge, that person is still practicing in the UK. So if an American AA wanted to go and work in the UK, that would be their route, would be to contact them. And if somebody wants to do that, people have reached out to me. I have had some American AAs who, in a very similar situation to the Canadian AA, has a partner in the military, and they're going to go and be stationed either in Europe or in the UK, predominantly in the Air Force, the American Air Force. So they will say, well, I still want to practice. How do I do that? So they could reach out, I could introduce them to the right people, and the potential is there for them to go and do kind of an abridged version of the program. We just brush on, in case there's any British UK AAs that are missing into that. The process coming the other way is not as easy because there are visa issues, sponsorship issues, etc. It becomes very, very, very difficult. Hence the reason there was just me and one other provider that came over. The other provider has since gone back to the UK. My UK colleagues, I was actually speaking to somebody just last week who was introduced to me from the UK, and it's like, I really want to come over. I really want to work over there. And we had a good conversation, and then eventually they're like, okay, well, I'm going to have to kind of climb over hot coals up and down mountainsides to try and make this work. It becomes very, very difficult. From student point of view, Nova is currently the only university that has an international rotation. So when our first students come in 2012, We had no documentation for them. We didn't know what to do with them. So we had to work with that legal team. So they had insurances based through NSU to be able to come over. It was self-funded. So they paid their own flights, their own accommodation, etc., etc. Like any current student that rotates around the US, you may know that the Nova students go, they could be in New Mexico 1 minute, then they'll be in Nevada, then they'll be up in Wisconsin. So, we like to give our students a good variety of movement. So they're kind of used to investing that money. They have to apply from a Nova point of view, and they are interviewed. So we bring over the preceptors from the UK, come to Quad A every year, and they interview that group of students, and then they select their group. If it was a different school, my advice is to reach out to the associations and just ask if there's any other hospitals that want to do it. There's a big political undertone in the UK at the moment, so it's not a good time for AAs and PAs in the UK at the moment. So, it's kind of like let the dust settle with things that are going on, but which we can discuss if you would like to, and then see how things are over the next year or so, and let's see if that's a possibility.
Oh, Mark, we could totally get into all of that, but I think maybe let's hold that for another conversation, because there are so many pieces of you that we've hit on this that I think are really going to resonate and inspire different people, or different people who are in their CAA journey at different points. I wanted actually to get to my sort of big last question, which is the ethos of this podcast, being that I believe the CAA profession is a road to a unique chance at building the life that you exactly want. Like, living your life by design is accessible to a CAA in a way that it's not accessible to, I don't believe, any other medical profession. And I'm wondering what your relationship is with that statement, and if you would agree. Has that resonated for you in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I've ever met an AA on either side of the world who has ever said they hate their job. And I can't say the same for other specialities. So, it's such a rewarding job. And that's a very cliched answer that I want to help, It's the Miss World answer, isn't it? That, I want to work with sick animals and children, Yeah. It's cliched in the respect that we are providing an amazing service. Patients are entrusting us with their lives. We are there to deliver that service, to keep them alive, to make them pain-free, to make them not feel nauseous, to do no harm. So it's a great, rewarding career in that. Across the States, it's rewarding in the respect in that you can choose where you work, what you do. You want to work in a surgery center and do inguinal hernias and lap choles for the rest of your life, and just deal with those young, fit, healthy patients per se. You can do that. If you want to specialize in peds, if you want to do pediatric heart transplants, you can go and choose those specialities that are appealing to you. And satisfy your need within your job plan. Of course, then we have our hours. So you can do 8, 10s, 13s, 24s, whatever people decide to do. And some people are going to do, I know colleagues that work a week on, and then they have kind of like 2 weeks off. And they can either pick up to do their local work or travel or do whatever they want to do in that time. So it allows us that. And of course, now there's no hiding from the salaries that we receive in anesthesia. Financially, we're in a gifted situation where it gives us a great salary where we are able to afford to pay off our student loans easily, live in nice houses in nice areas, drive a nice vehicle if that's what you want, or if you want to travel. I know lots of colleagues that their main driver is to save up some money and then go and travel and see the world and do these amazing things. So it puts us in a privileged position where we can do things. But on the financial side of things, we also have to kind of, we've got to where we are via paying our money and doing our courses. What we should be doing afterwards, when we're earning these big salaries, when we've paid off that money, is put some money back into our profession. And the way that we can do that is to be members of our professional association. So our national, Quad A, and our state organizations do not work without funding.
Yes.
I donate to my organizations, and I just do it via a standing order. So I don't even notice that money goes out of my account anymore. And, it's less than an hour's overtime for the most of us to be able to provide, a good donation to our organization. So there are the people that got us to where we are now. If you're going to go and take a job in Nevada, it would not have happened without the hard work of the people that worked tirelessly to create that state organization and represent our profession in there, being belittled by the people that were opposing us, etc. So if you want to work in Nevada, then put some money into their state. If you want to help with our Quad A, then help with that. If you don't like what they're doing, then put yourself onto that group and say, okay, I'm going to stand for one of those posts. I'm going to stand for a director post or a committee post and have your input. Unless you are actively involved in your state or your national organization, then you can't have your individual voice. And we've probably all got different individual voices that we want to share and spread out. So if you're not a person that wants to be involved at those levels, then fine, just do it by supporting them financially. We're fighting against groups that are, or not fighting against, I don't like to use the word fighting because I don't like to think of us fighting. We could all work together in harmony if we chose to do that for the better outcomes for our patients. Instead, what we choose to do is to fight and battle against each other because we think that one is better than the other, which is absolutely not correct for everybody that's worked with each other as part of an AC team, and for data and research that has been done that shows that the ACT team is one of our safest modes of anesthesia delivery. So my little rant is kind of, when you get out of school, when you've got a job, give back, help support your professions, and then, be an active part of your profession and promote our role. We are amazing, but we are more amazing as a group of people than we are as a small group of individuals. Like the work that you're doing, Mary Jane, just promoting everything, getting everything out there. The other people that are kind of Chibeli and Taylor and Anesthesia Sal and Jen Donoso with her work, just everybody is currently kind of pushing us. And we've gone from the best profession that nobody knew about to a profession that everybody's knowing about now.
Yeah. Well, I just really wanted to offer you gratitude as well, because the thing that the other content creators in our profession, the thing that they're doing is also the thing that is your strong suit, which is seeing a system as it stands and thinking, I want different. How can my unique skill set come into this existing system and turn it on its head, or change the piece of it that doesn't resonate with me? And you've done that. Just like you've blown that idea up. I mean, there's just so much good work happening with CAAs and regional anesthesia because of you. So I just wanted to number one say thank you for the work you're doing, and also to really point out that, so that if the listeners are thinking, gee, there's something in the CAA profession that doesn't sit with me well or doesn't resonate or I want to change, you are the person that is supposed to change it. Our profession is small, and it's this beautiful privilege to know that I have the power as one person to change, to make big change, which is likely true in the bigger world as well. But inside our profession just feels so much more tangible, and people like you are showing us the way. So thank you so much, Mark, for being here and sticking with this recording. We, behind the scenes, had a bunch of issues, and I can tell that today was the day we were supposed to have it, because what a beautiful conversation, just full of your wisdom that everyone else is going to get to hear. If there's any prospective CAAs out there, or current AAs who want to move to the UK, or somebody who's thinking, I've got a follow-up question for Mark, what's the best way for someone to get a hold of you?
So you can find me on Instagram, and you can find me on Facebook. I'm old fashioned. You can email me. And you can put my NSU email address can go into the notes, postscript notes. So I'm happy for you to reach out to me, and I will get back to you. And it might not be straight away. And I kind of have a pro forma reply that I have, because I've done this so many times, and especially from the UK people contacting me, I kind of have like a standardized email that I can let people know. But I'm happy to try and help anybody really, either get into the profession, or, we get questions about things, and we've got to look after each other. We've got to grow our profession, and we've got to support. We don't want to eat our children.
No.
So, we absolutely have to be there to kind of support them and try and help them however we can.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll put your Instagram handle I don't know your Facebook, so I'll have to get that from you. And I'll put your email, your NSU email in the show notes if anyone's wanting to follow up with Mark. I think that's it, Mark. We finally did it. And I'm just so appreciative of you. Yeah. And I can't wait to meet you in person at the Quad A this year and just continue this friendship and relationship that we've developed. So I really appreciate your work. And thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everything that you do for our profession as well. I saw you last year running around, interviewing everybody.
I didn't know you last year.
So exactly, yeah, I still saw you. So I mean that's great, and it's what we need. We need more of us promoting our profession and getting out there, because if we don't fight for ourselves, nobody's going to fight for us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. All right. Beautiful place to end. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
I hope you loved this episode. If you want to connect and discuss anything that we mentioned here in this episode, of course, check the show notes for all of Mark's information. If you have a question for me, the best place to get in contact with me is over on Instagram at Awakened Anesthetist. Instagram's really the only social media that I routinely show up on. I'm always checking my direct messages, and it's just been a really nice, easy way to connect directly with this community. So I encourage you to follow me over on Instagram at Awakened Anesthetist. As always, if you loved this episode, something you can do that really helps the podcast is to share it directly with another CAA in your life, or an AA student, or someone thinking about going to AA school. Every time someone inside our community says something good about this podcast, it really creates a momentum for more CAAs to be able to gather and share new information and do other things that maybe never seemed possible for CAAs, but once we're gathered together, we find a way to make them happen. I'll be back in February with another process episode. You can always join the Awakened Anesthetist newsletter community, which is just a more intimate community. Every month I send out a newsletter that's got resources, ways to connect, some wellness resources, as well as a new offering called Making Connections, which is really for the AA students and the practicing CAAs out there. It's a new connection group that I'll be offering once a month virtually. And if you're part of my Awakened Anesthetist community, you'll be receiving the emails to join that group and be a part of Making Connections. However our paths cross in the future, I hope we get to connect, and let's talk soon. Yoo-hoo!
We got there.
Mark, we did it. Oh my goodness.